From that cuckold in the Northeast, the land of colonialism and historical reverence, delving into free and intrepid esoteric exploration of everything under the aforementioned umbrella. Folks, I welcome you on a journey into the most detailed accounts of experience, evidence, and anecdote. Folks, this is Dark Hour Paranormal, and I am your host, Michael Roser. And tonight we are on the latter end of our immediate exploration into the world of the paranormal at large. And those of you who have stuck with us throughout the last 2-3 months have seen once again an influx of interviews with these different individuals commanding certain teams within the paranormal field. And that is entirely intentional to a certain degree. I can't get enough of this field, considering how much there is to traverse in way of information, knowledge, and experience. And the groups that I have had the pleasure of having on here on the show have delivered exactly all of what I just mentioned there. Jay Marcus, how you doing tonight? I did say hello to Ross Allison, my guest this evening, folks, for Jay, because she used to actually be part of their outfit. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Jay Marcus. Thank you for being here tonight. Now, that being said, Ross Allison is my guest this evening. And let me read you a little bio on their outfit, AGHOST, which you can find at aghost.org. Now, I like this acronym. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. They didn't stretch it to make certain words and remembrances. This is something that retains with the consciousness and the psyche, in my opinion, a ghost. I mean, there's no question about what they do. Certainly not hauling around lumber in some sort of Home Depot. We know that they're out there hunting ghosts. Founded in October of 2000, another handful of veterans we have here, of course. Advanced Ghost Hunters of Seattle-Tacoma, aka AGHOST, is an organization dedicated to providing education, training, and community outreach through structured investigations, data collection, and analysis. Short and sweet, folks. They hit every single nail on the head with that one description of what they do. That, to me, is the most important thing when we talk about, again, these teams at large. A lot of them want to dive into the realm of entertainment. Listen, I can't blame you. We all saw the Ghost Hunters. We all saw Ghost Adventures, all these different groups growing up, or at least within a certain period of time in our life. This is how things were presented. And it was, again, intentional in the way that they did that, because back then, this is how we garnered certain interest to bring in perhaps the layman, the common man, to this particular subject. But today, I think that there are curiosities plentiful. Wow, let's try that again. I think there's a plentiful amount of curiosity. And of course, we can sit around the water cooler at work and we can talk around the dinner table. These are household names and household subjects that we now get into, which are no longer peripheral in many cases. So, folks, I'm going to jump right into this now. I am very excited to have Ross with us tonight. And I have a feeling, as I have been so surprised before in many delightful ways, that he's going to present quite a bit of information, knowledge, and experience to us. And of course, we're going to be talking about his new documentary, ParaSense, The Naked Experiments, which I am incredibly interested to hear because, man, there are so many different ways that you can angle this particular subject, and I'm very curious how people see it, the perspective that drives them, the momentum behind them in this type of work. And tonight, folks, once again, we're going to get back into the world of the paranormal with Ross Allison of the Advanced Ghost Hunters of Seattle-Tacoma. Folks, introducing to you, Ross Allison. How you doing, my friend? Thank you for being on the show with us tonight. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here, brother.
Well, thanks for inviting me in.
Absolutely, mate. Well, listen, I mean, we're not going to, waste too much time here kind of going back and forth. I think we had a few words exchanged before the show here. So I want to get into the meat of what you and your team does. Now, in respect to founding this team, I mean, you're talking 2000. We're looking at 22 years ago. This is something that's not incredibly common with the ghost hunting teams that are out there. Most of them disband for one reason or another. Usually it's just circumstantial. Life happens. People get married, have kids, move away, you name it. But long story short, these outfits are not together any longer. So the question I have to begin with is sort of twofold. One, why did you decide to take it beyond just your curiosity personally and say, I want to form or be part of a team that goes out and investigates? And in that same breath of the word, what has kept you together as a unit throughout all these years?
Oh, well, for me, what got me involved in the field was my curiosity in the paranormal. I've always been fascinated with ghosts ever since I was a little kid. I mean, checking out every ghost book that I could find in the library and never returning them, that kind of thing.
Oh, yes, we're all guilty of that. Yes.
So, my fascination, is rooted to the fact that my mother loved to read me and my sister's ghost stories. So that kind of stirred that curiosity, and it just kind of stemmed from there. And I just, pursued it with a passion. I just wanted to know, do people really experience this kind of stuff? And, back when I started in this field, you really didn't tell people you were a ghost hunter.
That's right.
Back then you were pretty much considered crazy and you would be left alone at the party. So, it wasn't until, luckily for Ghost Hunters coming out in 2004, that we could all come out of the closet and say, hey, here we are with our flags waving in the air. So that made a big change in this field. But, before then, I was just, I lived in the Bay Area for a little while. So I got to, work with Lloyd, Auerbach back then. And then when I moved to the Northwest, ghost hunting was not a thing. There wasn't any ghost hunting groups. So I was left to, calling all my buddies saying, hey, it's Halloween. Let's go do some ghost hunting in the local cemetery. And they're like, yeah, but let's hit the bars first. So yeah, we don't need a bunch of drunks in a cemetery. So I just decided, I wanted to see if there were other people that were like-minded like me that really wanted to learn about this field and be more serious about it than just, the party goers and the weekend warriors. So a friend of mine just said, start your own group. So I did. And it just took off from there. So
Now,
it made us,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it made us, the oldest ghost hunting group in the Northwest.
And of course, that is certainly an accolade that you should be wearing on your shoulder quite proudly. I think, especially today as we move forward, a lot of these teams that crop up, they're reminiscent of everything that's come before. I mean, I don't see anything unique in way of approach. I don't see anything original in way of delivery. I mean, it seems to be the same thing over and over, and people are still going into rooms, shutting off the light and saying, we're going dark. I mean, no shit. I mean, the lights are off, buddy. We've already gone through this motif. But, I say this with a little bit of tongue in cheek, of course. Tell me a little bit. Yep, go ahead.
One of the things I will address, the biggest reason for that is it's the simple fact it's the blind leading the blind. We don't have enough people that are doing the real research, that are getting enough attention to let the audience know that we're out there. Right now, the audience is focused on the television shows.
Yes.
And so that's why it's the same thing over and over and over again. You've got, like I said, the blind leading the blind. No one knows what they're doing on these television shows, and the audience is imitating what they see. Monkey see, monkey do. And that is our biggest problem in this field.
Honestly, you couldn't have said it better. I like that idea, the blind leading the blind. And I think that many people get into this field. They have a notion that they want to start something. They've seen a few television shows. Maybe they had an experience here or there when they were younger, and they full on hit the scene and say, all right, we're taking in people for training. I've got this whole course I've organized. And yet at the very same time, they're unversed and don't have certain answers that are the foundation, preliminary answers that you should have in your repertoire before you start undertaking something like this. I mean, let's just make it simple and say protection, for example. I mean, there is a necessity for certain types of protection, I think, when you go into certain spaces, and we can certainly get into that a little bit. But again, just as an example, this type of work can be perilous. Are you going to go mountain climbing without the right pair of shoes, without the right rope, without the right tenders? You're just not going to do it unless you're foolhardy. And I think that people think this is something very accessible because you can go after work when the sun sets with a flashlight into some, abandoned area without, again, any sort of precaution or knowledge of what you might be running into. And believe me, I've had my experiences with certain foolhardy activity. And I think, there are a lot of people out there who can say that there's a similar experience in their life. Tell me a little bit about your first brush with the paranormal, maybe your first experience. It could have been outside of the group that you work with. It could have been, just as you started things up. Where was the first experience you had, and what was that like, jumping into the realm of the paranormal? Were you touched? Were you visited? Did you hear something? What happened with you?
Well, for me, it was interesting because when I started my organization, or even when I started getting involved in the 90s, A lot of people ahead of me had been involved in ghost hunting because they had experiences. They lived in a haunted house. I didn't have any of that. Again, it was just the curiosity that drove me into this. So for me, it kind of took a little bit of, after being involved in the field, having the opportunity to start my group and getting my group out to, spend the night at Alcatraz, which we were one of the first groups to do that. That's when I started to have these experiences. And it was, but then me, trying to be more scientific in my approach, you always question any experience you have. So when I did Alcatraz, it was interesting because we were spending the night on the island, and we had access to a lot of places at the time were not open to the public. Since 2000, early 2000, a lot of places have opened up since then. But one of the places that they took us into was the morgue. And connected to the morgue was this tunnel that went down into the underground part of the island. And I was the first to venture down into this underground portion. And if you're not familiar with Alcatraz's history, it actually used to be a military base. And this is actually where they stored the gunpowder because they had to keep it cool underground. So I'm going down into this historic part of the island, and I enter this tiny little room. And it's just a dirt floor, brick walls, arched brick ceiling. And I was the first one to enter this room. And I'm, taking pictures, and my members are starting to filter in behind me. But I want to get the widest angle of the entrance. So I'm starting to back up with my camera. And this is, before we had digital cameras. So this is film. So I'm looking through the little viewfinder as I'm backing up to take this picture. And somebody put their hand on my shoulder and stopped me. And I turned to apologize to the member that I backed into the corner, and there was nobody there. There was nobody around me. And I physically felt the weight of a man's hand on my shoulder, pressure of his fingers, and it physically stopped me as I was taking a step backwards. And I couldn't explain that sensation.
Did it feel icy cold or anything like that? It was an electrical sense, anything tactile?
No, it was just, again, I was expecting to see a living person behind me, and nobody was around me. And again, after you have that experience, you're questioning yourself, was it my jacket? Was it muscles twitching or something?
Sure.
And it just, I could not shake that feeling. I just could not, just like a part of me couldn't accept it as being paranormal, and a part of me was like, that was paranormal, That's the hard part about this field,
That's the dichotomy right there. I mean, you have the experience, but where's the data? In that same thought. I mean, let me ask you this: what's the significance of the relationship between the experiential and what you might get as data? So, in other words, if you've had that experience but couldn't quantify it, but are sure that you felt what seemed to be a man's hand on your shoulder stopping you, at what point do you suspend certain belief to understand that, all right, maybe I had an experience that I can't quantify yet? And again, how does scientific data really back that up if we don't have the tools to, again, quantify it?
Well, that's where we get into ParaSense, my documentary.
Please do jump
in.
If
you want to rush into that, but that's the whole purpose of ParaSense, is the fact that I'll go into the origin of ParaSense. It was about a little over 6 years now that a young man reached out to me. He was doing some construction work in an old brothel. And he told me that when he was standing alone, waiting for some materials to be brought upstairs, something groped him. And so ever since he had that experience, there was a few other, physical encounters that he had. And for me, it was not unusual to hear a story like this. I've heard tons of similar stories, physical encounters with, the other side have been reported for, thousands of years.
Yes.
So it was one of those things that I was just like, okay, this is, great. But when people have these experiences, it becomes their own personal experience. You just have to take them for their word. Because how do you validate that? How do I validate that touch on my shoulder? And that's what really got me thinking. It's just like, okay, how do you prove this element of the paranormal, especially when it's something that is so personal? And it's not always negative. A lot of times these physical encounters can be very positive as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I did my, research. I was looking at tons of books, historical books, documentaries, anything that I could find to try and see if I could find if anybody's ever tried to prove touch.
Mm-hmm.
And to my surprise, nobody had. No one's ever tried to take that level and see if we could validate the physical contact on the human body. And so that's what started this whole project. Is just like I started, digging around and trying to come up with experiments that we could validate these encounters. And I created all these different experiments that I was doing. And one of them that I came up with that is what I call the puppet. And this is where I should point out too, if the audience doesn't know, when I take naked subjects into haunted locations and produce a control experiment.
Interesting.
And the reason for this, for the nudity, is the fact that, if you're going to try and prove touch, you need to see what happens to the physical body.
Okay.
What's happening to the skin, temperature, all that. And so I always have to point out the fact that, naked experiments have been throughout history in science. So, put the perversions aside, it's just we're really trying to find out what's happening to the physical body. So nudity just made sense. And so I had people that were willing to get naked, sit in a controlled environment and do these experiments. And one of the experiments that I came up with was what I called the puppet. And this is where I took elastic string and I basically had taped it to the very sensitive parts of the body. We're talking the wrists, the nipples, the back of the neck. And you take the other end of the string and you stretch it out to various parts of the room. So if anything, and my hopes were, if anything should move around the room, around the subject, it might cause some vibration on the string or even a tug on the string, and you would feel it. So it's basically extending the nervous system outside of the human body into the entire room. And so I was having subjects were experiencing things. So this to me was like the first step, like, aha, there is something to this. There's something happening here, but it wasn't enough. For me, I've always been trying to be more scientific in my approach. So the data just wasn't there to prove it. Again, this was still somewhat of a personal experience for people. How do you prove that the string is vibrating or being tugged on? So that was the next element. I thought, okay, well, I knew a guy who actually is a scientist, and I had been on his show a few times. And so I reached out to him. I said, hey, his name's Chad Goodwin. And we got to talking, and I just asked him that basic question: how would you prove touch? And we got to talking, and I thought, well, if you're willing, come join me on one of my weekend getaways when I do these experiments and see what happens. And so he did. He joined me. We went to up to Northport, Washington, where that young man was groped, and we investigated that old brothel. And to my surprise, we were experiencing things. And he was curious himself. And this guy actually got naked himself. He was like, you know what? If I'm going to try and prove this, I want to experience it for myself.
Do it the right way.
Yeah, it was amazing.
That's incredible. I have to tell you, I was speaking with Rich Giordano from GoofOn the other day, and we were talking about paranormal teams at large. And of course, again, as I've mentioned, even in this broadcast, I mean, there's a sense of a lack of originality in approach. And, he and I kind of went back and forth saying, why can't these groups come up with something different? And we ended up coming up with a couple ideas ourselves within 5-10 minutes time, obviously, being versed in the field. But what you're presenting here is exactly what I'm looking for in a progressive paranormal outfit. You have taken a concept and extended it in certain ways that I think other people wouldn't necessarily have the cognizance to do. And I just want to acknowledge that off the bat, because this is something fresh and very much a breath of fresh air. Hearing this, Ross, it's absolutely incredible. I'm looking very much forward to this movie that you put together. And by the way, folks, when you see, the thumbnail tonight, there was just a small window that I took from the box art of this movie. It's absolutely awesome. One of my favorites I've seen so far. When you're looking at folks strung up with these strings, and you're looking at the data that comes in saying, feeling touched, as you mentioned, it's sort of an extension of the nervous system going out within the atmosphere, which again, I think is absolutely brilliant. What are you finding as a result of some of these experiments? So where I'm going with this is, you have some of these nodes attached to the neck or to the wrists. Where are people generally feeling these interactions via the strings and the vibration? Does it seem to have a pattern in way of location on the body, or is it more random in how they're feeling or where they're feeling it?
It's just random. I think it just depends on the location. We've done a few brothels where a lot of people, the subjects, were feeling it on the left-hand side. So there was something, and they were seeing things on the left-hand side too. So that validated, especially because they're not communicating with each other. So when you have these, different, subjects telling you that they're experiencing very similar feelings and seeing very similar things, that validates their experiences as well, because you're not giving them any leading information.
And that again is significant too. I mean, there are many times we have proposed walking into a location, perhaps with a medium. I don't know if you consider yourself sensitive, but I certainly know many who are. And one of the things they mention is, I don't want any knowledge prior to going into this place, and that's to keep that palate pure, so that when they go in there, we can then validate and say, well, here's the connection, and how did this person know this? Science up to this day and age still can't explain how somebody is able to walk into a room and sort of read the walls, if you will, in a resonant fashion. But sure enough, it just hasn't caught up, I think, in my opinion, but we're certainly there. Let me ask you this here. I mean, it's something that people have considered many times, looking at the field of the paranormal. Of course, this trickles over into ufology, cryptozoology, all these different fields of esoterica. What would you consider smoking gun evidence in the world of the paranormal to be, and how might you personally define that? And if you were to see it, or any of us were to see it, with the myriad of stuff that has been put out there today to wade through, would we know it when we saw it?
Well, there's a few things that I think you will be really impressed if you watch ParaSense.
Okay.
And just to tell your audience, if they want to track it down, you can actually go to touchedbyaghost.com. And as I said, we're bringing science into this, which surprisingly, still to this day, baffles me that there's still very lack of science when it comes to validating a lot of the paranormal phenomena we claim to experience. What I found is, what's important is the data. We have to be able to match up the data to our experiences, that we can show that there are changes in the environment that we can't explain. Why is this reading this? One of the things, as Chad had come on board and started to develop a lot of the equipment that was needed. And that's the thing, is a lot of the things that you see on ghost hunting shows are just the fancy bells and whistles to make it more suggestive that they could be experiencing something paranormal. It's really no data. It's not data. And that's what we really need. I focus my attention on touch because I feel if we try to prove at least one particular phenomena, such as touch, that could become the root to help us understand the other elements of the paranormal. The biggest problem we have in the paranormal field is it's so diverse, and everybody's just spread thin, and they're all over the place. But if we could just concentrate our attention on just one thing that happens out there, that will give us a better understanding of what is going on. And so I have focused my attention on just touch. I don't have all the answers yet, but we've made groundbreaking discoveries just doing this documentary. For the first time in history, we are able to track phenomena because we have developed sensors that we put around the subject as they're sitting there. And with those sensors, we have been able to see something come towards the subject and then leave immediately. And at that moment, they were scratched. That right there is enough to show there's something to this.
I still think, yes, absolutely, 100%. I agree with everything you're saying, and the frustration still comes from the fact that we're attempting to prove and validate something that still lies in the experiential, but at the same time, we have certain corroborative data or details that do support what we've seen. It's just not comprehensive enough to, put into popular science, or, be published in one of these larger articles that has sort of a mainstream following in the way of academia. That is really the shame. And, this does stem from academia too, and how that perception overshadows this type of research and work.
But I think we're getting there. We're getting there. Even if I have to be the one to lead everybody down that path, so be it. I'd like to believe that there's other people like-minded like me that would be wanting to be a part of this as well.
Mm-hmm.
But, if I have to be the one with the machete cutting down the path, I'll do it,
Somebody's got to forge it.
I was surprised just to find that there was nobody out there trying to prove touch. I was looking for something, for some inspiration, or some experiments that had been done that I could continue with, or, expand on. And there wasn't anything out there. So, to come up with an experiment called the puppet was just like, mind-boggling to me. It's like, wow, this is something so simple, but yet it's getting some amazing results. Now I just have to take it to the next level and be able to validate those vibrations or those tugging sensations that people have.
I think you're onto something.
Yeah.
Putting forward a hyper focus on one aspect, because you can't learn to run before you learn to walk. The concept is simple, and yet when you walk into a paranormal field, let's just say, okay, for lack of a better adjective and way of being all encompassing, there are many different aspects that you will be approached with, whether it be orbs or certain lights. You have audio senses, you have even those who bring about that clairvoyant idea, but then physical anomalies within the environment. Sometimes you have certain objects that shift, they disappear and reappear, they move. There's all these different things to sort of attack you in an attention deficit disorder type way, wherein you don't really know where to look first, but you're trying to gather all of this together, and at the very end you're just kind of overburdened and weighed down with all this bit of evidence with no connection. Yeah, go ahead.
The problem we have in this field is we have too many, and I hate to say this, lazy ghost hunters.
Mm-hmm.
People want instant gratification.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to do the work. They don't want to have to collect the data and then have to review the data. That's why they're so dependent on apps to give them that instant gratification, or I hate to say it, the ghost box. I see most groups now, they'll sit there, they'll put the ghost box out there, and they'll spend the whole investigation listening to a ghost box.
Mm-hmm.
And then that validates whatever they want to believe. And that, to me, I think is one of the worst pieces of evidence out there, because it's too suggestive. I've done far too many experiments to prove that there's too many problems with the ghost box.
Now, speaking of equipment, what are some of you? You mentioned that, obviously you're very creative with the equipment that you use, or at least the techniques that you go about this. What are some of the pieces of equipment that you do rely on, or you could say that you have faith in, to produce something more realistic in respect to approach?
I would say the two top things that we can rely on is audio and video. Right now, when we started doing the documentary ParaSense, and we started adding all these different sensors, one of the things that I've learned is a lot of the equipment that we're dependent on is not fast enough or even sensitive enough to pick up some of the evidence that we're starting to collect. So right there, that kind of shows that we're missing things. If those who are very serious out there that are trying to collect the data, and they're reliant on the EMF detectors, a lot of these EMF detectors are not sensitive enough or quick enough to pick up some of the stuff. We're finding that some of these evidence that we're finding is almost like lightning hitting the area. It's so quick. When we had our situations where a subject got scratched, it was so quick when it happened, which kind of makes sense to me, because if you think of, how does a scratch appear, our biggest thought is maybe it has to do with ions. Concentrated ions can tear the skin.
Interesting.
But it would have to be a very quick and powerful attack. And that's why a lot of times when people do get scratched, they don't feel it right away. They feel it later when it starts to burn or itch.
I like this. I like this. I mean, you're not just taking that phenomenon, saying, yeah, there's a scratch there, and we're going with the more visceral interpretation. You're thinking much below the surface, saying what exactly energetically, in a scientific fashion, could create this. Now, you mentioned ions, perhaps doing this, and if there's something etheric that has certain command, perhaps over this type of physics. I mean, maybe it's not even Newtonian at that point. Is that your best guess right now? Is it ions
Right now,
producing the scratch? Yeah.
electricity, stuff like that, you try to figure out, even with the fact that, if we want to apply the psychological aspect of it, because there's even theories that sometimes it may not be ghosts, that we could be producing this phenomena on ourselves.
Yes.
So there is even theories that, we could cause our own skin to tear through mere thought. Okay. You have to put it out there on the table.
Sure.
So then you have to go into the fact, well, if it is physical phenomena, something attacking the human body, how would that be possible? Well, electricity could tear the skin, ions could tear the skin. So there's a little bit of that could be happening as well. So my biggest thing, and again, this is just, we're taking this off of theory, off of the data that we've collected so far. We still have more to collect. We don't have the absolute answer right now. But when you are doing an experiment, a controlled experiment, all cameras are on them. You check over the subject before they sit down. You're looking for any scratches or any, visible marks. You even ask them the control questions. Are you feeling any itching or burning or any pain right now? And, you look over the spots if they do. And then you take photos, you take video. So you have that, and it's all on video. You sit them down. Then you do the experiment. And then after the experiment, you have them stand up, and then you relook them over, and then you find a scratch on them, a bloody scratch.
Fresh.
How do you explain that?
There can't be a way logically that we're familiar with. I don't think it's in our wheelhouse to understand that entirely yet. But again, there's the observance. There's the experience, and it's right in front of us. So you can't deny it. It's at least happening, regardless of whether we know how it happens or not.
Right.
There are many different entities, that I would say that we come across in these type of investigations, even in somebody reaching out, asking for help, saying, I feel terrorized or I feel visited. Maybe it's more malevolent, more benign. Regardless, there's always a presence. Have you ever worked a case wherein you may have been dealing with something outside the realm of what we would consider to be a spirit, perhaps a shadow person that seems to be from a different dimension, or an extraterrestrial that's somehow kind of floating between the vibrations? Have you come across anything along those lines, rather than a deceased person or a non-human entity that could be considered ancient and what we consider demonic, for, again, lack better adjective?
Right. Well, the problem is as I've always been more scientific in my approach, I try not to label things, because I've always said you have to go with what you know and not with what you think you know. And as the paranormal field is so diverse, you have many people having many different beliefs and their ideas of what is occurring. I have always stripped things down to the simplest form. If I'm going into a place where something obviously negative is attacking somebody, I can't sit there and say, oh, yes, it's a demon. Because if I label it a demon, then I'm bringing religious beliefs into this. And
Okay,
you really
right.
you can't go to that level. You just have to go with the basics of what's going on. Obviously, something is attacking somebody. Well, I hate to say it, we've all gone through our lives knowing quite a few assholes in our lives. So who's to say that when they die, they don't continue that
Agreed.
personality trait, So for me, I try not to label things, because then I think, we're making a mistake in trying to truly identify what we are dealing with. Because let's be honest, we don't know what we're dealing with. We're still exploring this, as we've already brought to the table. There's not enough science in this field. We're basing this all off of, popular beliefs. And we put it out there and say, well, somebody was just attacked, so it must be a demon. And everybody runs with the fact that, okay, it's a demon. But, we need more data to validate that. And I'm not saying that demons don't exist. I'm just saying All I'm trying to do is validate the encounter and say,
Yes.
okay, if there is something negative attacking them, well, what is it? How does it happen? What's occurring there?
I think that's important to look at it from a very static view. In that sense, I'm sure that you have investigators that you've worked with or people within your outfit that hold a certain religious belief. In your opinion, how important is that religious belief in terms of paranormal investigation? Does this perhaps yield more of a result in way of activity? Because again, you kind of talk about how we might be bringing up some of this through thoughts manifest or subconsciously. Do you find that religious belief plays any sort of role, significant or otherwise, in paranormal investigation today?
Well, I think the media has pushed that on us quite a bit. That's why a lot of these paranormal shows focus on just demons. Everything's a demon. And I think that right there pushes our fears. And that right also is what makes it so much popular because, we are very curious creatures. If we drive by an accident, we're all slowing down to look at what, the gruesome details.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing when it comes to, horror movies and, theme parks. We love the thrill. We love the fact of being scared. And that's what makes a lot of these shows so popular, is because they want to push our fear buttons.
Indeed.
And that's the biggest problem we have in this field, because now I find myself in so many situations because, yes, I was the first paranormal group in the Northwest, but now, there's easily 100 or more plus groups in each state. And so it's very competitive. And you get these groups that want to focus on demons. And when they get called into a site and they've convinced the owner that, oh, yes, you're dealing with demons, you need to move out.
Mm-hmm.
You're putting and most of your training is from watching every episode of Ghost Hunters,
Mm-hmm.
Now you're putting that client in a very awkward situation because you've terrified them. And now you've also put them in a situation where they're expected to put themselves in financial debt because you don't know how, if they can afford to just pack up and leave, And so we find ourselves constantly being called in from these clients because this group couldn't help them. And now they want us to get rid of their demons in their home. And then I'm in a position where I have to talk these clients off the ledge and say, well, what makes you think it's a demon? Well, because the spirit box said it was a demon. Like, okay, well, let's be honest here. If something was physically out to harm you, it would have done it by now. All right.
That's usually the call.
So
100%.
Most people are just frightened because they were trained to be frightened.
Well, you touched upon. Yep, go ahead. Well, I mean, you touched upon something. Sorry, I know there's a slight lag here. I apologize. Continue on, my friend.
Right. No, I'm just saying that's just the biggest problem is, media has taught us to fear ghosts, and now these ghost hunting groups are pushing that as well.
When I was, sitting back today thinking about this show that was coming for us tonight, that is something that sort of entered my mind, and I didn't know whether I'd touch upon it or not, but you've brought it up, and certainly we can go down that avenue a little bit. I mean, that's really the whole point. I mean, if you were never taught to fear any of this, then we wouldn't have the type of entertainment and possibly curiosity that we have today. There are so many people out there, even when I led an investigation group many, many years ago, that expressed interest. And when I sat them down to find out the real motivation behind it, it was literally just sort of a childlike curiosity. Oh, I think this will be fun. We're going to go in the dark and we're going to play with flashlights. Yeah, I'm sure there is an aspect to that, but we did that when we were, very young and not knowledgeable about what we were getting into. Again, we talk about the inherent dangers of this field. People do come back from certain locations with attachments. I've had two from two different locations in my time. It's actually what kept me from going the route of television, although I had something slated. We were filming a pilot, but I, realized that at that time we were doing it incorrectly. Maybe not necessarily walking into a place to provoke, but the way that we were walking into a place, we were just walking in. Again, to give a very simple example, it wasn't a knock on the door. We didn't send a letter saying, hey, we're coming at this time for tea. We would just walk in, and I find that many of the spirits, although there's sometimes a sense that they know you're coming. There was never a certainty until you show up. And once you do, you actually startle some of these entities, and they kind of take a defensive posture, almost as if you were encroaching upon certain territory that you weren't invited to, traverse. So, I mean, that's very curious that you bring up the idea of the fear being some of the motivation behind, what we see in respect to the television shows and why people go out and do this today. If you're able to eliminate that, you get down to the critical thinking, and that is the most important aspect that we can exercise when looking at a field like this. Now, to bring it back, I like the fact that you're not labeling anything, but just for the sake of certain posterity, I'm going to call what I'm going to describe a shadow person. Didn't have the hat, wasn't a hat man or anything like that, right? I've seen these in my waking states, but also in my dreaming states. And I had an experience 2 days ago where I laid down for a nap. Usually this seems to happen if I end up doing that, which is a rarity these days. But, I fell asleep on my bed for an hour and a half during the day. And I woke up because, I was having this normal dream. I remember just kind of walking around. There were others around as well. No place particular, but I had this overarching sense that peripherally there was a presence, as if I was being watched. Now, in the dream, I didn't think too much of it. I kind of went about my way, but still had the awareness that it was there. And at one point, it got a bit stronger, and I found myself in what appeared to be some sort of decrepit building. Maybe it was industrial, some sort of a corporate affiliation. Regardless, it was steel and concrete. And as I started to explore a little bit out there, kind of following this feeling that in my dream it was really kind of sitting in my solar plexus, in my chest and stomach, this overall feeling of dread, I noticed that there were two other people with me, but they had gone off to explore themselves. So now I was essentially alone. I approached the staircase with about 5 to 8 stairs on it, and I started walking up, and as I did, I noticed that there was this big steel door in front of me about the size of 2 regular doors in width, with a very small square window on the front. Now, I couldn't see anything into this window. It seemed very dark, but as I approached the door with each step, I started feeling the sense of terror, like something was behind it. Now, in a dream, maybe we're a little bit more intrepid and don't have the same reserve. I wanted to open the door, but something in me said, let's kick it open instead. I don't want to touch it because I feel like something's behind it. And as I rose my foot and I went to kick through the latch, the door opened, my foot hit the ground, and in front of me was this 6-foot tall shadow person, I would call it, because it looked like a dark shadow, arms, legs, everything head that you would normally see in a human figure. And the second I registered it, this thing punched through me, like just went straight through me. And the odd thing was that it kind of had this streak. So it went through me. I was still experiencing whatever this shadow was. And then the very end of it was a smaller version of that came through and exited. So it was very, I don't know how to say it, was very wide. But the impact that it had in the dream is that as soon as it hit my chest, and that's where it went right into the solar plexus, I crumbled to the floor. And all of my body in this dream was, the muscles were convulsing. Now, I actually woke up because it was happening in my physical awareness as well. I mean, to the point where I kind of like very lazily had one eye half open, still in the dream. I looked at my lips were quivering uncontrollably. It was a completely autonomic experience. There was nothing I could do to control it. And as I came to, I felt like I was now anchoring back into my body. Okay. So the reason I'm sharing this experience with you now is because I'm curious what you found in way of evidence versus what we have in our waking states versus what happens in a dream, and how realistic do you find something like what I'm experiencing in a dream to actually have a certain impact in the physical world?
Well, right now, as I said, with the experiments that we're doing, we're trying to validate what's happening outside of the body. So we are able to right now, with the equipment that we've developed, to validate that there is some sort of disruption happening when people have certain experiences, especially when it comes to physical encounters. So I think right now we still need more data. Like I said, I don't have all the answers right now. We need more data to prove, before we write the papers and submit it to science. Now, I've always been open to the fact that we are all, a little bit psychic, whether we've channeled that ability or not, that I believe in the whole our inner, fight or flight feeling. Those are a part of our survival skills. So
Yes.
we are a little more sensitive to the energies around us. Just most of us don't pay attention to it because we are distracted, especially with technology today. Most of us are more focused on our cell phone rather than the environment around us, So
that's the truth.
it's something that I think we just need more data. We really do. The biggest thing is most of the paranormal field is built off of hypotheses, not really theories, because theories are based off of data. All right.
Agreed.
So you got a lot of ideas and a lot of great ideas. Don't get me wrong. I keep an open mind to everybody's beliefs, but we really can't, label things without enough information. And that is what we lack right now, is the information needed to validate the paranormal field.
I love how grounded you
different.
sit. You're unwavering, and that's again something we need so desperately in this field today. I mean, when I ask these questions, obviously I'm looking for opinion. We don't have the answers, but sometimes you kind of just I like this seat that you're sitting between the two pillars, right, of left and right brain interpretation.
Well, I would love to
It's
be
rare.
in a position where I could validate your experiences, and if my research helps to validate what you're experiencing, then I'm doing my job. Whether it was a psychic experience or whether it was a real physical phenomena, I'm doing my job if I can validate either one of those.
Absolutely. And that's certainly what we're looking for, because it's not that we want these experiences to cease. It's that we're seeking to understand what it is we get into, and, perhaps the implications that are much larger in respect to understanding what this world actually is. I mean, I remember years ago when The Matrix had come out as the movie, okay, because I think the book was out, quite some time prior to. But, long story short, the whole idea of a malleable and flexible reality was what really appealed to me. And I have found since that production there to be more truth in that interpretation rather than fantasy. If that's the case, are we right now, Ross, surrounded by the paranormal, and why?
Again, it's I would love to have more data on that. I'm sorry. It's the thing is that really fascinates me is, even when it comes to quantum physics, there's a lot of great ideas out there. And those, again, are hypotheses. They're not the theories. We need the data to validate those to become theories. And so I think right now we base our beliefs off of, what makes sense to us.
What's familiar.
That makes sense. That makes sense. You're saying this and it makes sense to me. It's the same thing with religion. We have so many different variables of religion out there. We can't say that just one religion is right and the rest are fools. We base our beliefs off of things that feel good to us, that make us feel like I am good enough to be able to transcend to my heaven out there.
Sure.
That I want to believe in. So, the paranormal field is exactly the same way. We have different sects of the paranormal because people have their own personal beliefs of that element. So it's really hard to say, what is really occurring, what's fact and what's fiction out there, because right now we're basing everything off of fiction and faith because we want to believe that this is what it is. We just need more data to validate that. That's all.
The real kick in the ass for me on all of this is that it's clear, starkly clear, in looking into anthropology and archaeology and all these other studies that surround ancient cultures, that we were connected to all of this at one point. I mean, in every bit of research that I've done, and believe me, there's much more that I could get into, of course. I mean, lifetimes that we could, search these certain topics. I've never found a story of, some abandoned little complex out there in Egypt, and, the inhabitants of the era were all afraid to go over to this one little place because, this old guy died there. So it's not there. We don't see that in our human history until a certain point where I'm not sure. Maybe it was the consciousness that dove down. I mean, there's certainly a lot of ideas around how the Earth's magnetic fields and its consciousness directly and is intimately connected to ours, and how one begets the other. So, I mean, we dip in consciousness, the planet does as well. This is what we collectively experience. But if it's raised, there are certain points in history that we can point along to that end, to whether it's right-brained or left-brained. Whether you have a world of shamanic indigenous people that have connection to spirit world, or you have an industrial revolution. Again, these are, dips and troughs that people experience collectively within, the consciousness grid, if you will. I just find it absolutely fascinating that today we have forgotten so much, that we're sitting here basically learning to talk again, when we used to have an extensive vocabulary to explain it, and the relationships that we had with these spirits or otherworldly beings that we would call today, again, was a normalcy.
Right. It's like I said, right now we're distracted. We're not really in tune with ourselves, and we don't take the time to be in tune with ourselves. Some of the best psychics out there will tell you that meditation is a big part of it. You have to be able to understand your feelings and be able to understand the energy around you, to be able to read the energy around you. But most people are distracted with the technology. We don't really sit down and meditate anymore.
I agree.
So, and part of meditation, is just going back to the early 1900s, when people just sat on their porch and their only entertainment they had was to take in the environment around them. They didn't have the TV or the radio to turn to. They just sat down and relaxed, with their nice cup of tea, and took in the environment, watched the grass grow out there, their fields growing of wheat. And that is a part of the things that we've lost touch with.
Yes, and that is in itself a type of meditation. Just taking in your environment, slowing yourself down. I remember going to an Ayurvedic doctor some years ago, and there's a specific oil treatment that she was using on me to sort of cleanse out not only the auric field, but the physical body as well. And essentially, this is dipping a warm oil and letting it drip on your third eye. And, there was a process that goes through that. But one of the things that kind of caught me at the end, I think I was maybe 21, 22 years old. So, still virile and young and full of energy and spunk. I'm thinking I'm going home and, picking up my guitar, going to start writing some music. Maybe I'll go downstairs, work on some breakdancing, whatever the case is, or what I was into at the time. And she looked at me, she says, "No, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go home, you're going to build a fire in the fireplace, and you're going to shut your mind off until it's time for bed." And I was like, "What? How? I'm going to do what?" She says, "You're just going to look at this fire and do your best not to think of anything at all. Just empty your mind." Right. And I said, "Wow, it's a very interesting concept." And the first time I had I think it was 3 of these treatments. And the first time I went back, I found it very difficult to do this. And yet, I sat next to this fire and I just kind of stared off into it and allowed my mind to sort of clear. And of course, you always have these thoughts that come through, but you just sort of let them go, right? Just as if you go into a meditation. I did notice a difference, sort of an abandonment or a disassociation, I think, with some of the heaviness or gravity that I was feeling prior to this treatment. The very next day, I felt much better. But yeah, that's certainly an aspect of our ancient cultures that, obviously we have lost in a large degree. Today, you go out hiking or sit on your porch somewhere, if you're fortunate enough to have a place that's rural enough that you can enjoy the countryside without, cars and people, destroying that. It's again, a rarity. It's something that, again, people do take for granted. So that's a very, very interesting concept to bring up. Now, we are running a little short on time, but I do have one more question for you. And I think this is important for anybody who's really kind of getting into this or has a certain curiosity. In your opinion, what is the most important aspect of ghost hunting that someone new or interested in the field should know immediately?
As I always say, go with what you know and not with what you think you know. Education is a big part of this, and you don't get a full education on just depending on the television shows. That is the biggest problem, is people think, oh, just because I've seen every episode of Ghost Hunters or Ghost Adventures, I can now go out there and be a ghost hunter. That's just like me saying, well, I've seen every episode of Grey's Anatomy. Let me perform surgery on you now.
Exactly, Ross.
That's the biggest problem we have. And no one needs a degree, unfortunately, to become a ghost hunter. So, if you want to get out there and do ghost hunting, start with the basics. Don't get involved with clients. Just go out, check into a haunted room at a hotel, do your weekend warrior ghost hunting type of thing. Go to a cemetery and do some ghost hunting there. The biggest mistake that people make is they're in such a rush to get involved and ghost hunt that they start to get clients involved. And that's where they start to pass on the wrong information and cause more trouble and problems in the field.
100%. I mean, again, I can't see it said better than what you're saying here, Ross. And your overall message is something that certainly resonates with me, something that I have been driving for within these interviews, trying to convey that sense of understanding or comprehension in respect to, where you put your foot first. It's again, not jumping into go ahead. Yep.
Well, I was going to say, the big problem that we have is if we're truly trying to have a better understanding of what is happening out there, we don't need more people in the field muddying up the field and making up stories, because we need the real true data to understand what's happening. And if people are out there making up stories for the dramatic effect or for their 15 minutes of fame, it only causes more problems for us. It only takes us 3 steps back than 3 steps forward. So we need to also have people be open and honest with their approach in the paranormal field, because it's those true stories. That is the raw data we need to help us understand what's going on.
Yes. 100% yes. Overall, resounding yes. Ross, listen, it has been an absolute pleasure having you with us on the show tonight. But before we go, in your own words, where can we find you and how can we contact you? I do have some links in the description. I'm more than happy to add anything that you have that I haven't caught.
Well, definitely. I always tell people, follow me on Facebook, Ross Allison Ghost Hunter. I do a lot of live feeds from places I get the chance to investigate. So always check that out. You can find all my books out there as well on Amazon. And then, of course, check out AGHOST for the group's investigations. And if you're interested in the documentary, which will be shortly downloadable, but right now you can get it on Scare Network. But you can find it Touched by a Ghost.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, my friend. For the moment here, I'm just going to take you off. If you have to go, I understand. Otherwise, stick around for a moment. I'll say my proper goodbyes off camera. But either way, It's been an absolute treat having you here tonight, brother. Thank you. Wow. Again, I'll reiterate exactly what I said earlier. Right? Ross Allison is a breath of fresh air when it comes to this topic. And you know what? I think that's exactly what I needed when it comes to, talking about this topic at large. That's exactly what I needed, because it's it's so easy to find the very same things and the similarities. And we covered a lot of that tonight. Very quickly, we would gloss over certain things conceptually within this field of the paranormal. And again, I think Ross has been spot on talking about this, and his interpretation and perception, again, is very progressive. So all of you out there who are watching the show and have your own paranormal outfits, take note here in way of originality. I think Ross is going to be a much more prominent face within this field as the days come on, considering the work that he's doing is much different. It's a completely different angle. And again, something that we very, very much need today in the researching end of the paranormal activity that we all experience in various ways. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. I think this was another fantastic show, and certainly we do have some things coming up next week. What I will tell you is that we're going to have a little extravaganza next Wednesday. I have 2 shows that evening, one at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, p.m., 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, and the other one will be at 11 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. If I can't do this every single night, given certain schedules, I guess for some people, the 11 o'clock slot is a little bit late. And, for that being said, I do understand it, but you guys go on space.radio at 12 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time. So, with whatever excuses are out there, listen, we're going to have a good week this coming week. And of course, we're looking forward to the Montauk trip that will be undertaken in the mid part of August. So keep up. don't miss a thing, because we have a lot coming. And this is, again, just what's happening with this channel. Never mind what we're working on with Third Phase of Moon. Gufan and I have been, talking about certain things. Still working with Dr. J Radio Live. Apollo Stereo is in the background here. We got all these people still hanging out with us. And of course, you will see more of the collaborations as we're moving forward. Very quickly, I just want to say thank you to Alex Oyen Under the Veil. He has a fantastic channel. If you guys are not aware, please go and check him out on YouTube. Thank you for the $5 super chat, my friend. I really appreciate all of your support. I guess I now have the ability to take donations through the comments. I was shown that this is what I have today. So if somebody wants to send me a penny at one point just to show me that it works, I'm curious what that looks like. I have no idea. But either way, thank you guys so much for being here with us tonight. And again, appreciate your attendance, participation, and support of Dark Hour Paranormal. We are not going anywhere. Believe me, we are here to stay. And hopefully it'll always be on this platform. But if it isn't, it'll be on something more progressive if something exists within that realm. But until next week, folks, thank you so much, moderators, super chatters. Appreciate all of you. Big heart to all of my my good listeners and audience out there. Thank you so much. If you're watching this in the archives, certainly leave a comment. Let me know what you think. You have questions, please email me at darkhourparanormallive@gmail.com. If you want to get in touch with me for any other reason, you may do so. It may take me a few days to get back to you, but don't disparage. I promise I will within due time. So that being said, folks, thank you so much. We'll see you again next week, right? Yeah, it's Thursday. I'll see you again next week. In the meantime, stay explorative, stay inquisitive, and continue to delve into the deep, traversing this beautifully nebulous field, an avenue of shared travel in search of the truth. Folks, be good. Ciao.